This happened to one of my friends who used to work the night shifts at a coffee donut place called Tim Hortons. If you live in Canada, you probably understand that it's most likely kind of like a donut coffee shop, kind of like Dunkin' Donuts in Canadian style. Now, this took place sometime in 2018, and it was during the colder months. Mainly January was and February were the colder months. My friend at the time of this story, we'll call her Charlie, and she had been working night shifts before she moved. Now, she hated working the night shifts mainly because she worked from 10 to 6 in the morning. She goes home and sleeps for the rest of the morning and a bit into the afternoon. However, though, something really made her feel uneasy about the job. To put it bluntly, it was a night that it was freezing cold, mainly due to the temperature being dropped to a below 20, mainly 30 at most. Now, Charlie was busy working inside the shop, serving coffee and donuts and other stuff. But as Charlie was doing her shift, however, there was this strange man who seemed to be in his late 30s. He seemed to look like he was homeless, so he walks up and says, could I get a coffee? Charlie put down the order that he wanted a coffee, and one of the other workers started to make it for him. But as the coffee was being made, Charlie could see that man was staring at her mainly. She felt a bit uneasy by it, seeing that she didn't know him, or why he was staring at her so blankly. This was getting creepy. The coffee was served to the man as he goes to a table and sits down and begins to drink his coffee while looking what seemed to be on his phone. Charlie was then instructed to take the garbage to the dumpster, so she decided to do that. When she took it to the dumpster and put the garbage in, she saw that same man again. He seemed to be standing maybe a few feet away from what seemed to be the alcove of it. Now, there was no dead end, but there was kind of like an alcove like area in Tim Hortons. Mainly, it was a very narrow path. And of course, as the time when Charlie looked up, the man was staring at her. Can I help you with something? She asked. This man just stared at her, blankly without expressing any feeling or any emotion or even saying anything for a while. But then he spoke. Can you help me with my car? My car broke down when I just pulled up here, he said. I'm sorry, I'm not a mechanic, but I could maybe call for somebody if you like, Charlie offered. But the man shook his head, and Charlie ended up walking the long way, making sure the man didn't follow her. And thankfully, he didn't follow her when she went back into the restaurant. When she got inside the restaurant, she was almost done her shift, and it was 6 in the morning, and that man had not come back. She thought that he must have given up or something. But as she stepped out of the restaurant, she could see that there was at least a few figures standing not far from from her car. Charlie became so nervous and went to tell one of the managers about this man. They called the police, and by the time the police arrived, those men were gone, and it was from the exact same man that she served coffee for him. All this time, Charlie had no idea what kind of plan this man was doing with all the others that were standing not far from him. They weren't there when she was taking out the trash, but she does not want to know why this man was there. But regardless, nothing like this ever happened again for a very long time. A neighbor of mine named Samantha lives in the same town that I'm living with her today. And this happened sometime when she first moved up to the town that was about 6 hours away from my hometown. Now, I'm not going to say what town that this happened and took place in, but Samantha was basically in her 30s, and this happened sometime in 2018. Now, it was a year before I moved up there, so it was around, I guess, December 22nd. Samantha had plans to go out of town for a couple of days to spend time with her family for Christmas. Now, since Samantha was in her 30s, she and her husband had supposedly got into a bad fight, which led them into a divorce. I'm not going to say what kind of fight they got into, as it's nobody's business, but let's say it was for personal reasons. Now, she was a single mom of 2 kids, but she was dating another man who she really liked, and he was very calm and collected. Now, this was just when they were just together for at least maybe 4 years, and they had been together for a long time. Now, Samantha was doing her night shift at the gas station, and she was working in the convenience store paying for people's gas. Now, this happened sometime, I think, around maybe after midnight, and it happened to be on a weekday, so there was no one going up to come up into the gas station. Not unless they were paying for gas or getting, chips or something. As Samantha was standing at the counter, just staring into blank space, she looked at her phone and she started to text somebody. As she was texting, somebody ended up walking inside, seemed to be a woman. She was no older than maybe 20, and she walked in the gas station's convenience store to buy something. She got at least a bag of chips, and Samantha ringed up her total, which she gave her a $20 bill and took it before she left. She didn't even stayed for the change, but Samantha sighed and didn't really care. However, though, what was really strange was that this woman was staring directly outside of the convenience store. Did she even have a car or something? Or maybe she was waiting for a ride with someone? She had no idea, but there was nobody else in there. She then walked out maybe a few minutes later, and Samantha honestly had no idea what this woman was doing. However, Samantha was back on her phone, mainly checking on Facebook and whatnot, when she looked up to see another woman. This other woman was about maybe 17. She looked like maybe she might have been her friend or something. But this was getting strange. This 17-year-old woman went inside the bathroom of the convenience store, and she had been there for a half an hour. The lady's car, who came in earlier, was still there in the gas station. Samantha had thoughts of going over to see if there was something wrong, but she didn't want to risk it in case of this woman had some sort of plan. She knocked on the bathroom door and thought that maybe somebody was there, but there was no one there. All of a sudden, the 17-year-old woman burst out of the door and starts screaming. But Samantha had no idea why she was screaming. She looked in the bathroom and didn't see anything that could have frightened her. Maybe she must have been hysterical or something, or maybe she was autistic. She had no idea. But this woman started screaming outside of the gas pumps and starts screaming like if she was on fire. Now, the 20-year-old woman actually was there and got her friend to go into the car, and they drove off. Samantha thought this was like the most weirdest encounter that she's ever had. But she contacted the police and they investigated the area, but they didn't find anything. And since then, Samantha's never seen those women again, and hope that someday she will never run into them ever again. Now, this actually happened to one of the police officers that I remember being friends with and used to do night shifts as a police officer. Now, the friend will call her by the name of Lori. Lori used to be at the high school, a long time ago, and this actually took place in 2011. Lori was basically somewhere around her early 20s, and she was a working police officer for night shifts. The day shifts were okay, but she mainly worked the night shifts, seeing as Her father used to be a police officer, now retired, has done it before. Now, one of these shifts actually made Lori quit. Well, not really quit, but stop doing night shifts. When Lori was driving around out of town, and she used to live in a town not far from where my hometown was, maybe about 40 to 45 minutes. She was resting in one of the parking lots of what seemed to be a plaza. She was on her phone looking at her text messages when she all of a sudden heard screaming. She had no idea what was going on or what was happening. So she looked up and looked over to see that there was a man who happened to be chasing a woman. She ended up turning the police car sirens on and started to chase after them. However, though, that didn't end there. Apparently, the scream didn't come from down the street, but it came from somebody's house. There was what seemed to be a man who happened to be in his early 50s. He had gloves on, had a crowbar, and he even had what seemed to be a mask on. He was using the crowbar to break down one of the windows, since the front doors have security cameras. Now Lori grabbed her gun and she reached over towards the door and opened it very slowly, careful not to make any content or sound when this man and continued to try to break down the window. He looked over to see Lori. "What the hell do you want? Please drop your weapon now," Lori stated. Of course, this burglar drops his weapons and pulled out what seemed to be his gun and nearly shooting Lori. Lori was lucky that the bullet missed, and she ended up shooting the man on the shoe, or at least his foot, causing him to yelp in pain. Now he tried to get away, but of course, Lori was able to tackle him to the ground while calling for backup. The backup police arrived and they arrested the man, and the woman that was screaming was actually somewhere in her 30s. She said that her husband was at work and her first 2 children were upstairs sleeping, and she had just went over to get some food from the convenience store. But when she was walking back, she saw the man who happened to chase her down. He was trying to break into her house to steal her stuff, as there had been a lot of theft going on in that town at the time. Since this happened sometime in 2011, though, Lori was lucky enough that she stopped this man. This was the last night shift that she's ever done, and she doesn't even think about doing other night shifts as a policeman anytime soon. This story really stood out, and it really affected her in a very crazy way. What I mean by crazy way is that sometimes she would wake up from having nightmares of somebody breaking into her house and killing her or do God knows what to her. Eventually, that stopped when she went to therapy, and Lori has never been on a police mission at night ever again.